Satnamji, hello, yogis and yoginis, and welcome back to this course on the Yoga Sutras. Today we are going to go into Yoga Sutras from the second chapter on the practice 2.3 and onwards. We'll get to 2.11, I believe, today. And this is going to be the topic of Kleshas. We saw in the other video that this is connected to Klishta, so the coloring and colored thoughts, how to deal with colored thoughts. Something that Patanjali already warns us about in the first chapter when he talked about the suffering that we can receive in our thoughts. Our thoughts can be something that makes us suffer. And we're going to see today about some of these afflictions, like he would say it, the different kinds of kleshas that there are. So let's remember that we have seen now 2.1 and 3.2. The last video that we did was on Kriya Yoga, and that was an interesting review of what Kriya Yoga has been over the ages, looking at back to the Bhagavad Gita and how Krishna would speak about yoga itself and how would that coincide also with Kriya Yoga, and the definition that Patanjali gives us as being three parts. If you remember, there was tapas, that was the heat, and that was mainly on the physical body. There's swadhyaya, that is studying, that's the mind, and then this is varapranidhana, which is the devotion and faith to the spirit. That's heart to the spirit. So body, mind, and spirit, how the three elements are included in this practice of Kriya Yoga. We also talked a little bit about Kriya Yoga from the tradition of Paramahansa Yogananda, but basically this was the concepts of 2.1 and 2.2. And this is the introduction to the practice that Patanjali gives us before we go into the Ashtanga practice with the 8 limbs. He says this is the beginning. The beginning is with Kriya Yoga, and this is where you're going to start working on uncoloring the thoughts. So this is where we're going to go straight away today with the Sutra 2.3. Let's go. There are 5 kinds of coloring, kleshas: forgetting or ignorance about the true nature of things, avidya; I-ness, individuality or egoism, that's asmita; attachment or addiction to mental impressions of objects or objects, raga; aversion to thought patterns or objects, dvesha; love of these as being life itself, as well as fear of their loss as being death. And we will see, and the last one, by the way, that's abhinivesha. We will see all these in detail over the following sutras. So we will talk a little bit about this. Let's touch upon them a little bit, but then we will see them more in detail as we go to particularly 2.5, 6, 7, 8. We're going to be exploring this in more detail. But let's start with the terms. Avidya, the concept of avidya. So he's saying, look, this is the 5 kleshas. The kleshas, you remember, that's the coloring of the thoughts. Like when we are looking out through the window, these layers that are going to color my perception, and they are going to cause some form of suffering out of that. And he says, well, there is 5 different colorings of that. Now, this 5 is always relevant. Every time we find a number 5 in the teachings, we can notice how it may be connected to the 5 elements or other things which are coming in groups of 5. And something that I have explored a number of times, I think already 2 or 3 times in other videos in this channel, is the concept of the 5 thieves, or the 5 evils, or the 5 water carriers, sometimes they are called. And there is this Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Ahankar. And they coincide very closely to these ones, but I'm not going to go into those in detail because you can watch some of the other videos that I talk about these, the 5 evils. So I don't want to repeat myself too much. That's why it's already recorded in a video. If you want to watch it, you can go into that one. But it will be interesting to explore these 5, and there is something about them that is very interesting connected to our emotional nature. That's something I haven't seen anywhere in these books that I'm reading to convey to you what I perceive are the meaning of these sutras. I mentioned that I am learning as I am teaching, so I'm reading these different translations and these different books at the same time that I'm doing this course. And I haven't read anywhere, and I notice a very interesting pattern with emotions. But I think it's better if I approach that when we have seen one by one all of them. And there will be something extremely interesting, a pattern that emerges from that I think will be very interesting. But for a start, let's take it with the five aspects. Yeah. So the first one is avidya, then avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, and abhinivesha. And avidya being not vidya, avidya, the letter a in Sanskrit often means no, just like in Spanish or English or many other languages, like something that starts with a, like abnormal, which is something that is not normal, right? So avidya is when there is no vidya, when there is no wisdom. And we will talk about avidya more in detail into the following, what is that, the 2.5, yeah? But avidya is this ignorance, translated as ignorance generally, and it means ignorance of the self. We will see a little bit more about that, but let's say that ignorance of the self, or let me put it on the paper so I can point with my finger, yeah? So there is avidya, there is this ignorance, and the idea is that by ignoring who I truly am, my true self, my Atman, then that creates my sense of ego, which is partly the cause of feeling separate. So the ignorance of the self brings about the egoism. And by being separate, by feeling separate, I identify myself with my likes and my dislikes, and then I get attached to those things which I like, and I hate, or I feel displeasure, or I feel disgust by those things that I don't like, the dvesha. And then whatever I like and what I dislike, I operate from this region, trying to get close to something and getting away from something. And then that's the abhinivesha, considering that those things that I think that I'm attaching to, those are real, assuming those are real, I cling to them through my life, and I'm afraid of losing them. It doesn't, in this translation, it doesn't mention fear, but I've noticed that the concept of fear appears in quite a few of these translations. In this book, beautiful book, it's in all the books I use are in the description of the video. You can check them out. I recommend it. We were just reading this one, Satchidananda, ignorance, egoism, attachment, hatred, and clinging to life are the 5 obstacles. We read already Gyaneshvara. But look, the concept of fear appears here as well. Fear of death, yeah? Clinging to life or fear of death, fear of death. So there is this concept of fear. But also fear of death, we should qualify it a little bit, because what is that? Like just being afraid to die? It's a bit more elaborate than that. But I mentioned every one of these 5 we will explore in detail over the following sutra. So I'm not going to do the exploration of this fear right now, but we will talk about it in the following sutras. But let's carry on then with the 2.4. Avidya again. That's the field for the others mentioned after it. So this is like the origin. It all starts with avidya. And whether they are dormant, feeble, intercepted, or sustained. So let's remember, there is 5 kleshas, there is 5 obstacles, yeah, these kleshas. And these 5 obstacles start with avidya, with the ignorance of the self. And these obstacles, they can be dormant, feeble, intercepted, or sustained in these 4 different we could say states or stages, because our relationships will be changing over time with these 4. So let me give an example of how a relationship to one of these afflictions, one of these kleshas, would go through the 4 different stages. It mentions one is active. So let's say that you are a smoker and you wish you would stop smoking, but you feel the addiction to smoke. By the way, when I say attachment, sometimes we talk about attachment like raga, but it also means addiction. and is referred to addiction. Addiction is just a more extreme form of attachment. But let's say that you're addicted to nicotine, you need to smoke, and every time you are constantly experiencing that need, that constant dependency, and if you don't supply the need, if you don't cover it, after a little while you immediately start feeling this necessity to smoke. Well, then in that case, the klesha is active. That's the first form, active. This would be actually the last one that is mentioned in this text. Yeah, that would be the sustained. It's sustained. Now, interrupted or intercepted, that's when you start noticing this addiction and you decide to stop it. And so you maybe do some things to stop smoking, and maybe you do some practices. If you go to yoga, you can learn there is a number of pranayams and meditations that you can do that can help you to break the habit and the addiction and start not feeling dependent on the substance. So maybe you start doing yoga, you start doing these practices, and there will be times when this constant need for the dose of nicotine is going to be ameliorated, like less strong, soften it, and sometimes it will stop for a while. So maybe you've done these practices, or maybe even just getting distracted with something else for a number of hours. You don't even notice that you haven't smoked a cigarette. Okay, you were very engaged with something that was attractive and engaging and exciting for you, and you didn't even notice that you didn't have that affliction. Okay, so you are not feeling the attachment. So that means that the klesha has been interrupted or intercepted. Yeah, intercepted could be like, I do this pranayam, and then that stops me from needing the dose of nicotine, and so I intercept the attachment. And for a while, for the next hour, I'm not needing it, for example. So that would be the interrupted or intercepted, the second aspect, which they are in the opposite direction. So sustained, that's the active, intercepted or interrupted. Then comes the feeble, which would be like if you have a continuous practice of these techniques that you learn to stop smoking, or you have already stopped smoking, right? And you already stopped for a number of months, maybe even. And for the first times, the first weeks, maybe even months after you stop smoking, the need to smoke, even though you're not smoking anymore, the need to smoke may come and go. That's also interrupted. Yeah, maybe you see somebody smoking and you feel the need, then you don't see them smoking, you don't feel the need anymore. Or maybe you are in that context in which you generally smoke. Like some people are very, what they call social smokers, like they smoke when they go for a coffee after lunch. All right, so after they quit smoking for the next following weeks or months, after lunch, they're going to be feeling that need, and that's an interrupted klesha. Now, when that need goes away and is much softer, excuse my English. I've been speaking a lot of Spanish these days and my mind is still trying to switch. So when it's softer, then this is the reduced, the feeble version of these kleshas. And this could also be, somebody who has fully stopped smoking. They don't smoke anymore for months, and they don't feel the urge constantly, but there may be a shadow of it still behind. So there is still the shadow of a temptation coming every now and then. It's not fully pure, it's not fully clean. And then the final klesha is when it has been fully deactivated and it's inactive. And actually, there would be two more states. One would be when it's dormant, yeah. But dormant is not fully dead. So dormant could be like, it could go dormant for a long time, and then that doesn't mean it has fully disappeared. This is kind of like when an ex-alcoholic says, I am an alcoholic, right? I mean, they have stopped consuming alcohol for years, maybe even, but they consider themselves an alcoholic even though they are not drinking, because it's very dangerous to go and fall back in the pattern. So they will consider that they are just not doing it. But who knows? The addictive pattern is still in the brain, right? So it's dormant, it's not manifesting, but you always have to be careful. So that would be the dormant state of the klesha. It's not interruptive because it's not happening on and off, it's just dormant, but it doesn't mean it cannot wake up. And if we talk about this in relationship to karmas, if we think about this as karmas, the karma is asleep, is like the seed is asleep. But the seeds of karma, the samskaras, are not fully released yet. The release of the seeds has to take a few more steps. So just like the person who stopped smoking, maybe it's something else. It's like we have, what can we say, a habit to complain, right? And we're addicted to that habit, complaining. And when we see something that we dislike, we fall into that pattern of complaining. So we train ourselves through discipline and practice and awareness of what we say and what we do and what we think. And from an active pattern, we go to uninterrupted. When we're going to complain, we stop ourselves from doing it, but we still feel the temptation to say what is not, what is going on and complaining about it and nagging the others about this. But you stop yourself, then goes into a soft, attenuated one, in which it doesn't affect you so much, the thing that you would generally be complaining about, until it gets to the state of dormant, where the pull to complain is dormant. You don't feel it immediately, constantly in the background, stronger or softer, but it's just a dormant. I would say that even beyond these four stages are still kleshas, right? I mean, this is when they are still kleshas. Even dormant is still a klesha. It's when you remove the coloring, it's not even dormant. Then you are fully free. And I do believe that somebody, like alcoholics, I believe that somebody can reach to such a state in which there is totally, absolutely no trace of that in their system, or the psychological system, or emotional system, or spiritual system. It's fully out of them. That's it. That karma is gone. It's done. And I believe that's possible, because that's the idea of yoga, isn't it? That the possibility to be fully liberated from these prisons is there. It is possible. We can get there. So it would also happen with addictions. Of course, there is also a saying in the teachings that is, never assume you've reached there. Never assume that you got there. And I think that's why it is safer for those who have been alcoholics to be able to say, look, I'm not going to assume that I've done it. I'm not going to assume that I'm free. Even though I haven't drunk for maybe 20 years, I will not assume that I'm free from that. I will always stay awake and aware. And I think it's a safe position. But while it is, even if it's dormant, that's still a klesha. So there's those four types of stages within our relationship to the kleshas, and there is 5 kleshas. So I've named the 5 kleshas. That was the 2.3. I've mentioned the 4 stages. Now we're going to go into the 5 kleshas one by one, and we're going to explore them in much more detail. And remember, we want to minimize these kleshas. We want to attain samadhi. That's part of the path that we want to do. Let me read from this one, the one on the screen. Hold on. The root, forgetting or ignorance of the nature of things, avidya, is the breeding ground for the other 5 kleshas, and each of these is in one of 4 stages: dormant or inactive, attenuated or weakened, interrupted or separated from temporarily, and active and producing thoughts or actions to varying degrees. That's 2.4. Let's go to 2.5. Let's go into avidya. And avidya is of 4 types. Regarding that which is transient as eternal, mistaking the impure for pure, thinking that which brings misery to bring happiness, taking that which is not the self to be the self. All right, let's go into these four slowly. So, by avidya, by my ignorance of the real self, by my ignorance of who I truly am, then I have a number of misperceptions. Let me put the book again. I regard the impermanent as permanent, the impure as pure, the painful as pleasant, the non-self as the self. Well, let's go slowly with this. Now, avidya is avidya, not vidya. And vidya is this, sometimes they will translate it as the knowledge of the truth. To know the truth, to know what the truth is. This is the root for the word Vedas, the Indian Vedas. The Vedas would be this wisdom that brings the wisdom. Yeah, wisdom is when you are in the light, when you know things. Avidya is when you are in the dark, you're in the ignorance of things. So avidya means the ignorance, and vidya means knowledge. Knowledge of what? Knowledge of the truth. Truth is the permanent, the things that are unchanging. So we are connecting it to vidya and the Vedas, and we say that when there is avidya, there is four aspects. You know, I've been avoiding writing in the paper. I don't know why. I'm gonna just do it. I think it helps to think about this concept. So let's do it. Let's write on a piece of paper. We said there is 5 kleshas, and we are talking about the first one, and the first one is possibly the most important because out of this one, all the others are born. So here we have avidya, and that includes the impure is perceived as pure. The impermanent is perceived as the permanent. The painful, this is the dukkha. Yeah, we talked a lot about this in the first chapter. Is perceived as the pleasurable, the sukh. And what is not the self is what we perceive as the self. So we identify ourselves with things which are not real. They are not who we are. Now, if we look at these 4 things, some things should be pretty clear or stand up, which is that this is what Maya does to us. Maya is this concept from yogic philosophy. When you look at Purusha and Prakriti, Purusha being the spirit and the consciousness, the pure one, Purusha, yeah, pure, and it manifests into the creation, Kriti, Prakriti. So as Purusha manifests into Prakriti, there comes this force that makes us believe a number of things. We call it Maya, and sometimes it's translated as an illusion, but actually more than an illusion itself is like it creates a number of things that we believe those illusions. It's not that Maya is an illusion, it's like saying this world is not an illusion. But what we believe that we understand about this world, that's an illusion. And our perception of our experience while being in this world, that's an illusion. And what illusions are those? Well, there's a number of them. Maya creates a few effects. One of them is that we feel separated from everything else. So as we come into this world, we feel disconnected from the source, disconnected from God, disconnected from our spirit, from the Purusha. And we feel that what we have is what there is. So if I see myself in this body, then this is who I am and that's it. This is my limit, my body. And my body is going to die someday, and so I will disappear. So that's my perception. And I So the best thing I can do is to have fun in this year, in this life, no, and enjoy this lifetime, because that's all there is. So there is this idea of have fun, enjoyment, which is pleasure, but actually it's a local, temporal, short-term pleasure, which is going to bring disaster long-term. No, it's like when we see we don't take care of our body, of our diet, we will see the consequences later on. So there's this temporary pleasure brings a lot of pain later on, and that's connected to this dukkha and sukh. Yeah? And there's a confusion between what is permanent and what is impermanent. We make impermanent the things that are permanent, and we make permanent the things that are impermanent. And I mean by that is that we think that this life, that's all there is, that's it. It's a impermanent life that it will finish, and I am this body will die. Well, that's not true. There is an essence, a self that is going to carry on. That's part of the vidya, of the wisdom, yeah? But in Maya Vidya, when Maya presents, this is all there is, it's telling you, look, what you see is what you get. This YC week, yeah? What you see is what you get. And you see this body is like, oh my God, so this body is going to die. So you think that this body will die. And at the same, so that's the perception of impermanence of the body. But at the same time, we think that the things that we're going to be attached to are going to be there forever. So there is a false perception inside that we should, for example, be attached to material things. And there is this false feeling that, yeah, let me accumulate things for myself, like a good house, a good car, and land, and some shares, whatever. Material things that I think that I'm going to be able to take with me. Well, it's a funny paradox, because you believe that the body is going to die and then that's it, but at the same time you're trying to grab on to things which are impermanent, and so there is a confusion between what is permanent and impermanent. And then the impure is perceived as pure. So some of the practices that we will get attached to, that they are actually not sattvic, they are not dharmic, they are actually going to cause a number of karmas. So there is all these things happening, and we identify with this physical body that is going to die, and that's the identification with the false sense of self. So we can see how there is all these four questions, these four aspects, they are brought by Maya. Let's put it like here. Maya is creating this effect, and we believe it. And by believing that, we fall into ignorance. Or you could say that through our ignorance, we believe it. You could also say like that. So by reaching vidya, and sometimes you call it jnana, like Gyan Yoga is about wisdom, is about realizing that these things are not real. And so coming to get in contact with the truth. So that's the realization that one may have through the path. So there we go. Now, avidya, I mentioned it's often translated as ignorance. Let me just say one thing. The word ignorance by itself is not evil. And the very same capacity, this is a capacity for ignorance. We have a great capacity for ignorance that we apply it to ignoring the real things, the pure and the permanent and the sukh, the self. Yeah, we are unable to perceive the truth. We ignore the truth and we get attached to what Maya is telling us. But the very same capacity that creates that ignorance, if we refine it, we can utilize that ignorance to ignore a number of things, like ignore attachments, ignore things which are seducing you out of your practice, ignoring distractions to be able to focus, ignoring toxic habits and toxic tendencies. And when somebody's trying to pull you down in a particular path that you don't want to go, you ignore that. So the word ignorance, we shouldn't make it evil. That capacity to ignore something is actually very strong and powerful if you are able to channel it. So with the right jnana and with the right applied consciousness, you can redirect that capacity for ignorance to the things that you wish to ignore, so you know what you want to focus on. I think that's an important concept that we should mention. And sometimes also ignorance is described. This is what happens when you are in darkness. Yeah, let me say, like a black moon. Imagine, no? This is at night, as opposite to vidya being in the light. But there is this in this beautiful little book, yeah, the Swami Satchidananda's book. There is an interesting point. I think it's in this book that it mentions how the path of the yogi is not yogi. The practice of yoga is not for those who are in the light. Listen, it's very, very interesting. The path of yoga is not for those who are in the light. It is also not for those who are in the darkness. And you're like, wait, what are you saying now? That's very weird what you are saying. But look, he talks about avidya as the typical example that is given, that is, a person in the night finds a rope and they think it's a snake and they start shouting, snake, snake, and somebody comes with a lantern and they focus the light on it, and then you realize, oh, it's actually a rope. Never mind, right? Okay, so, well, wait a moment. Because if you are fully in the dark, you don't even see the rope. So for those people who are in absolute darkness, absolute ignorance, they are not even going to consider the rope as a snake. So they are not even going to approach yoga. They're going to be totally, if you try to approach somebody who is fully ignoring any kind of concept of spirituality, you can go with your best of intentions that they are just totally ignore you. Yeah, that's the avidya aspect of the ignoring. And they're not even going to consider anything remotely spiritual. Everything is going to be dismissed out of hand, just like that. So those who are fully in the dark, yoga is not for them. Now, those who are fully in the light, they don't need yoga because they are already in the light, right? They are already in the light of consciousness. They are fully realized, purely, completely conscious, already reached sainthood by whatever path. Maybe they were in a different tradition, whatever. They're already in the light. They already see the rope for what it is. It's a rope. So no need for yoga, no need for them to do yoga. Yoga is for those who walk the path of the twilight. And that's pretty profound. Yeah, yoga is not for those in the dark. Yoga is not for those in the light. Yoga is for those who are walking the path in the twilight. So you have awakened enough to realize that you are in darkness, but you see enough not to be sure whether it's a rope or it's a snake, and you want more light into your life, right? You've awakened enough to notice, look, there is some patterns in me that are not healthy. There is some behaviors that are toxic and they are creating all sorts of suffering and karma. And my way of communicating with these people is not appropriate. My way to responding to my wife's criticism is not appropriate. My children are making me angry. My job is making me depressed. What's happening with me, right? You are in the twilight. You are not in full darkness, because then you don't even notice this. You are completely oblivious to all this. But you are awakened enough to notice there is something dodgy, something wrong in the shadows, right? In the shadow aspect of myself. And there is that a rope? Is that a snake? Some things are harmless and it's fine. You're experiencing that, that's okay. That will go away as you mature, as you progress. That thing that you notice, that's a snake. That's a poisonous snake. Watch out. If you carry on with that kind of thinking, that kind of behavior, that kind of emotion, if you nurture it, if you nurture that narrative that you give to yourself in your mind, that's actually really dangerous. So watch out for that kind of snake. And then what can I do? Well, here is what yoga can do for you, right? So yoga is for those who are experiencing that twilight. And that's also very interesting. I did a video on the twilight some time ago, a long time ago, I think, probably over a year. I can't remember even the title of the video. But there was one idea that is very interesting. When we do yoga, and when yoga is more powerful, is when you are in the twilight. So before sunrise and during the moments of sunrise, yeah, before sunrise and during sunrise and during sunset as well. That's typically the period when we call, particularly in the morning, Amrit Vela, and the hours in which we are most, we have the most access to the beyond. Let's say it like that. Yeah, it's not dark, it's not light. We are in between spaces, and like Buddha said, the middle path, right? So right in between, in the middle between the light and the dark, and that's like a threshold. And you can cross that threshold and go beyond to what is beyond. Like it's like the border between dreaming and awake. You know, when you wake up in the morning and you're in bed and you are not really in a dream, you are awake enough to know you are not dreaming, you are not fully awake yet, you are still in contact with what you dreamed, and your mind has an access to something subtler. And I don't know if you can follow what I'm saying, but it's a feeling that you can access a different way of thinking. And you are sensitive to some message, important message for the day, or if you can open it, there could be some very valuable insights and ideas that can be really important for what you have to do during the day. So that happens in that twilight. And just interesting, yeah, the concept of twilight linked to vidya and avidya. All right, I think that was enough with the 2.5. Let's move on to the 2.6. So the coloring klesha of I-ness or egoism, the asmita, which arises from the ignorance, occurs due to the mistake of taking the intellect. Well, buddhi, I mean, in this translation they talk about buddhi, but in the original Sanskrit there's no buddhi anywhere. Eh? It talks about the instrument of seeing, darshana shaktyo. But he takes, okay, taking the intellect to itself be pure consciousness, purusha, drik. The original Sanskrit is Drik Darshana Shaktyo Ekatmata Iva Asmita. Asmita is the I-ness. So that's talking about the Buddhist, a little bit of a free translation, but let's read some of the translations for this sutra. So egoism is the identification, as it were, of the power of the seer, the Purusha, with that of the instrument of the seeing, the body-mind. So the seer, the consciousness, identifies with the instrument, the senses and the mind linked to the senses. So the consciousness has been trapped by the instrument, which is a concept that we talked about it again and again, how, you know, the ego mind are intertwined, and then the ego mind trap the consciousness. They are intertwined as well. Yeah, it's like this in another scale. So in asmita, the I-ness, the sense of I am, has been trapped by this instrument that is allowing us to perceive the world, which is the mind. The mind is voicing a number of thoughts, and the I am identifies with those thoughts. It's basically saying, you are identifying with your mind, with what your mind is saying. And your mind is saying, I am Spanish. Oh, you are Spanish. But that doesn't make any sense. I'm not Spanish. You know, in my essence, I cannot be that thing, that concept of Spanish. What does that mean? I mean, if you really stop to dissect it, what does it mean to be Spanish? Am I that thing? That's not the nature of myself. Right? I'm not Spanish. It doesn't, when you really stop, that doesn't make any sense. And a metaphor that Swami Ganeshwara utilizes to explain this is that is a similar confusion to the filament in a light bulb and the electricity that makes the light bulb shine. So you see light in a light bulb and there is a filament which is shining, but the filament is just the instrument for that current of electricity that is going to create the light. So, okay, through the power of my consciousness, through this mind, look at how much I can do. I can think and I can make plans, I can organize, I can create. All this power, all this light that comes out is because of the electricity that comes through in. That's the Purusha. but the mind thinks, oh, it's me who is doing all that. Well, as soon as the spirit goes away, the person dies, the brain can be in perfect condition, but as soon as the spirit goes away, the brain stops working, doesn't do anything. There's no electricity going through the wire. So Ashmita, this klesha, is to identify with the instrument itself, with what's happening with the mind. And this is the term that we generally call the egoism, because that's the ego believing I am the doer. Yeah, or another term for ego is the hamkara, which I mentioned before, the 5 evils. Kam, krot, lobh, moh, ahankar. Ahankar, I am the doer, I am the one who is doing. That would be the ego. Satnam, Isabel, hello. Short connection for you. That's wonderful. It's good to see you. And I saw your message. I will reply. It made me think the message that you wrote about violence and aggression and the man. I'm reflecting upon that, and I will respond. But it's good to see you here, Satnam. So we said there is these 5 kleshas. First one was avidya, and the second one is asmita. So ignorance, and because of my ignorance of who I am, I associate myself with the ego. So because of avidya, therefore asmita. You will notice that these 5 are in a row, and they are in this order for a reason. They are one a consequence of the next. Well, if we go into asmita and we talk about it like the ego, my I amness, I mentioned this in other videos. This sense of ego is formed very, very young, when we are very little, still playing with the world, still trying to appreciate what is this world, what is the world that we are discovering. And children operate in a very dualistic way, in the sense that you either go forward or you go back. I mean that you see something that you are interested about, you go for that. And you see something unpleasant or disturbing or scary, you move away. That coming closer because it's something shiny and colorful and it's attracting you, you start to create your likes in the world. Yeah, I like these kind of things. And something has a smell that is very pungent or strong and unusual, or has a shape that is spiky, or maybe there is something that could be something instinctively dangerous, like a spider, and then you pull away. And that's the beginning of the creation of my dislikes. So what I like and what I dislike is born from this attraction and aversion that is from very young age. And as the ego gets stronger and this sense of I amness, the asmita, identifies with that, with what? With the likes and the dislikes. I am the kind of person who likes these kind of things, and I am the kind of person who dislikes these kind of things. Like the person who says, I am a smoker or I am an alcoholic. They are identifying with the things that they like to the extreme that they became attached to. And we all have those kind of attachments. And the strongest attachment is the attachment to the ego, right? Or let's even say addiction. We are addicted to our ego and we cannot let it go, right? So here we go into the next stage. That's the raga. Let's read about that one. That's in the next page. So raga is a separate modification of mind, attachment, which follows the rising of the memory of pleasure, where the 3 modifications of attachment, pleasure, and the memory of the object are then associated with one another. Well, the whole thing about the memory of the object and the attachment and the pleasure, this is just, he's trying to explain something that is going to be developed later on in the text. So don't worry too much about that, but it's just saying basically, raga is attachment to those things which are pleasurable. Let's check from the book. Let's check from this book. Attachment, the raga is that which follows identification with the pleasurable experiences. And of course, that goes right next to the 8th, because that's dukkha, that's the painful ones, Aversion is that which follows identification with painful experiences. So we have identification with the pleasure, identification with the pain. So I'm going to be averse, I'm going to feel aversion towards those things which are painful, I'm going to feel attached to the things which are pleasurable. Well, of course, think about it. Avidya, ignorance of the self. If I don't know who I truly am, I get attached to the voice that is telling me who I am. That is the ego, the asmita, and that's my I amness. And I am the kind of person who, whatever the ego says, and the ego says what? I like this, I dislike that. This polar expression. I like this, I don't like this. And then we go into this, more than polarity, it's more like a duality, what we experience. Yeah, I like this, I don't like this. Well, as we go into the things that I like, I grow attached to those. And to the things that I don't like, I feel aversion towards those. So attraction and aversion. Very simple. All right. And there is one detail that I think it's here in the book, something that I was reading, how the problem is not with feeling the pleasure itself. So if you take a little sweet and you take a bite and you feel the pleasure, it's pleasurable. Nice. You can enjoy it. There's no problem with that. The problem is 2 minutes later, you're going to feel that wave of the desire to go back to feeling that kind of pleasure. And that wave of desire, that kind of, I want that, that is the attachment, and that is the thing that is going to create the klesha. Yeah, that's the klesha. The klesha is that second wave. It's not the initial enjoyment of something beautiful, something sweet, something nice. No, okay, you can appreciate beauty, you can appreciate something that is nice, you can be cooked a nice meal and you taste it and wow, delicious. But how much are you going to get attached to that? Are you going to want to go for a second serving when you are already full? Are you going to be going into the desire to continue with that experience, which could create an addiction in the terms of, some drugs? That is the wave, that's the klesha. That's the klesha that we are talking about. That's the raga, what we call the raga. Okay, so raga and dvesha. Dvesha is the aversion, dvesha. And that's the likes and the dislikes. All right. Let's go for the last one. Since we are with the book already. Clinging to life, flowing by its own potency due to the past experience, exists even in the wise. Well, okay, let's read Swami Ganeshwara for this one, 2.9. Even for those people who are learned, there is an ever-flowing, firmly established love for continuation and a fear of cessation or death of these various colored modifications. Okay, so I mentioned that this fear of death and clinging to life, sometimes it may look like it's just about being alive, and it is. It's also that, being attached to life, but and fear of death. But it's not just about life itself for myself and my body, but it's the life of the things that I am attached to. And fear of death of the things that I am, my identification. So I'm afraid that the thing that I am attached to is going to die, for example. So if I have an identification with something and I feel that can discontinue, then I'm going to be afraid of losing that. And it makes sense, right? Imagine. Let's go back to the beginning. Avidya, ignorance of the self, creates the ego. Out of the ego, I get attached to the things that I like, attached to those. I dislike, aversion to those. And if I get something, I'm afraid to lose it. Right? That's the fear of losing. So I cling to those things, to the life of those things, and my life as I have defined it in relationship to those things. I define my satisfaction in my life on whether I have those things that I feel attached to or not. So everything is connected, and every one of these is leading to the next. Now, let me write this down here for a moment. I want to notice that thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the video that would be Very surprising, very interesting, I noticed. So there is avidya, asmita, that would be to the ego, yeah? The I amness, the I-ness. There is raga, there is dvesha, and abhinivesha. The raga is the attachment, dvesha is the aversion, and abhinivesha is the clinging and the fear. Well, when I was reading this list of 5 things, I noticed something very interesting. These kleshas reminded me of I already mentioned some of the time that many years ago when I was little, I remember being in the beach and my sister had bought, she got, I don't know how, this book by Paul Ekman on emotions. And she was learning about, what's that called? Non-verbal communication, non-verbal clues, and reading emotions in the face. And one of the things that Paul Ekman was saying in that book, and this has become a field of study from psychologists, about how there is a number of universal emotions that you can find them in animals and in humans, and the expressions in the face and everything is exactly the same. And some people argue that it's a bit more complex and maybe there are more of these universal emotions, but the basic 6 that Paul Ekman identified, they are still considered like very strong, these 6. Look, how interesting, huh? I'm going to do it in another color. I'm going to do it in red. The universal emotions. And we have fear. And fear, it's very interesting that it's extremely connected to the first chakra. It's a very first chakra concept because the first chakra is in charge of survival, and the fight or flight mechanism is triggered through fear. Yeah, the amygdala is going to signal to us that we have to respond in a crisis situation, and we are afraid of a situation. So that's going to be triggered by this. So the fear factor is linked to this abhinivesha. Aversion, when we don't like something and we feel pulled away from that, you can feel it. There is a disgust face even that manifests in our face. That's one of the basic emotions. Disgust. Yeah. Now, attachment, something that we enjoy, something that we like, we're going to feel attracted to that, and we will experience joy or pleasure in the face. And by the way, this is also like with the chakras 1, 2, 3. You can already see 1, 2, 3, because disgust is like water. Aversion is like water. Water says no. Water is for cleaning. So it's like cleaning things out. It's like saying no to things. It's like the second, the neutral mind, the second spiritual body. So you see the disgust. And the joy is like the third. So how interesting that they are aligned in this way. Now the fourth, asmita, the I-ness, that's the ego. Rather than identifying with who we truly are, that we will associate to the heart and the self in the heart, we associate with the ego. And this could be actually 2 possible things. Let me see. Well, there could be a number of things. One is, it could be anger. Because anger could also come from this, you're attached to something and that thing is removed from you. So you can see joy, but you can also feel the anger here. I'm going to put anger here. I think it's more connected to this, yeah? Something that you can enjoy if you have it, something you're going to feel angry if you don't have it. And the ego, it can be connected to anger towards those who are different from us, but you can also experience it in one of those basic emotions that is also studied in psychology of emotion. It's called contempt. Like you're going to be dismissing other people who are different from you, different from your ego, with different values. But the one emotion that I'm more interested than these two even is sadness. If we are going from the first chakra, second, third chakra, and third chakra is fire, that's why it can be joy and anger. Then when we go into the fourth, in the heart, you can feel a joyful heart or it can be into a sad heart, let's say. Sadness can be more connected to water than the heart, but I find it interesting that we experience this sadness because the moment you connect with the ego, you identify with this ego, you feel separated from the real self and from everyone else. So this sadness appears here. And the last basic emotion that Paul Ekman was identifying, I think it was Paul Ekman, I think it was written like that, is surprise. I put it up here because avidya is ignorance, and you get surprised by the things which are ignorant about. You don't get surprised by something that you already know, right? If I show this pen and I do this, the pen is here, right? If I do this and then I reveal a blue one and you're like, what? That's a surprise because you were ignoring that I had changed the pen behind my hand, right? So avidya could be a source of surprise. Wow, and shock and surprise. So maybe it's just a curiosity, maybe it's just a fun thing, but I find it quite interesting that these 5 kleshas align with the basic universal emotions that we can find in all humans and animals. How these are the way we tend to go. These are the ways that we go into with our ego. Yeah, as we identify with the ego and zoop, these are the basic emotions that appear. All right, that was the 5 kleshas. That was up to 2.9, but I want to explore 2 more sutras because they are rather short and I think they are connected to this. Let's go into 2.10. When the 5 types of colorings, the kleshas, are in their subtle, merely potential form, they are then destroyed by the disappearance or cessation into and of the field of mind itself. Okay. Well, let me read 11 as well, and then we will talk about them. When the modifications still have some potency of coloring, klishta, they are brought to the state of mere potential by meditation. So when they have potency, meditate, they become soft, and when they are soft, they're going to recede back to their self, back to their primary cause, the ego and the mind. Let me read these 2 from the book as well, and then hopefully we will find something interesting from here. In subtle form, these obstacles can be destroyed by resolving them back into their primal cause, the ego, and in the active state, they can be destroyed by meditation. Well, I want to read this paragraph for you because I find it very revealing. Thought forms in a potential state, samskaras, and by the way, we are reading up to here today, 2.11, but the following videos, 2.12 onwards, are going to be about karmas and, well, you already see it here, right? About karmas and the samskaras. So if we want to learn more about karma and how it operates, that's coming in the following video next week. So thought forms in a potential state, samskaras cannot be removed by meditation. Samskaras are the seeds of karma. And just by meditating, we don't remove them. when you meditate on these impressions, you bring them to the surface. You cannot destroy them by this means, but you can see and understand them well and gain control over whether or not they should manifest in action. So this is saying that there is a karma, and it's latent in its latent form. So I gave something nice to somebody, I have good karma that it has to come back. If I slap somebody, then I have to be slapped back. But that seed of karma lies dormant, is waiting, is called samskara. So when you meditate, you bring that samskara to the surface of consciousness, because it's asleep, you bring it to the surface of consciousness, and by contemplating it, then you can avoid it from manifesting into an action. You can trace them back into their subtle form and see directly that the ego is the basis for all these obstructing thoughts. So you have these nasty thoughts that are happening, you don't know why, but then as you meditate and you go deeper into these thoughts, you find some original seed, some samskara behind that is creating these karmic thoughts. Then, when you transcend the mind in the higher samadhi, even the ego is lost. When you let go of the ego, all the impressions in it will also be lost. But until that occurs, the impressions will not go away. Now, you will remember that we talked about this in the first chapter, particularly on the different types of samadhi, and there was nirbija samadhi. That was without seed. That's when all the samskaras are released. Until then, we have sabija samadhi. There could be levels of samadhi when there is still a seed. Now, those seeds can be disempowered through the power of meditation. You remove the power from the seed, and it can be dormant. Or you can even kind of burn the seed. You can make it so that rather than letting the latent impressions wake up, you go into there and you create a new impression that is going to even put the seed, destroy the seed, burn it so that it cannot flourish. And eventually those seeds are gone, and that's when you get to the samadhi with no seeds, nirbija samadhi. To get rid of these impressions completely, you have to break the ego. So first you clean the superficial things, and ultimately you break the pot. It's just a metaphor he uses. By meditation, you can understand the thought forms and clean them up. Then when you have gotten a glimpse of where and how they are, you can slowly trace them to the root and finally cut it out. So this is connecting to the concept of the seed. And this is all about these gross forms of thoughts, right? When we move on next week, when we start talking from 212 onwards, we will talk about the subtle forms of thoughts as well. But on these gross thoughts which have left a seed, and these are karmic thoughts which come to the surface, you can work on them through observing them through your meditation. How did it say it? They can be destroyed by meditation when they are active, or at least becomes more subtle, and then reduce them. There is a little practice that I want to suggest. It's very interesting. When you are meditating, so if you close your eyes, you go into meditation, you are maybe, let's say you are focusing on the breath. And then for a while you are just breathing and you don't notice anything else but your breath. And you are maybe counting your breaths or counting 8 seconds to inhale and 8 seconds to exhale. Okay. Now, at some point, because our meditation is not yet perfect, we lose concentration and we start thinking something else. And then we are thinking about tomorrow, we have to do these things, and we have to go somewhere, and we have to talk to that person. Oh, I shouldn't forget to tell them. And then as you are thinking this, you realize, wait, I'm not meditating. I'm thinking about that person. Well, when that happens, a little exercise is to trace the thoughts back. Okay, how did I get here? Because I was breathing right now. How did I get here? And try to locate every single thought that occurred between you counting 8 to inhale, 8 to exhale towards that distraction. And you will notice, okay, because, yeah, all right, so I was thinking about that person because I was seeing them tomorrow. And that's because I remembered I had to do that. And if you can go back to the origin of the first thought that pulled you out of consciousness, right? Because you were breathing in 8, exhaling 8, conscious, then suddenly a thought distracts you, which means that your attention gets attached to that thought and goes away, that can be very interesting. So if you do this practice, anytime you get distracted, go back to the origin where you got distracted. And that kind of thought will have coloring. There will be some klesha, likely, and you can observe what was the klesha about? What was that coloring about? What was seducing me, that thought that allowed me to lose my state of consciousness? And that's a very interesting way to trace back the origin of the thought. And by tracing back, you are coming back to consciousness as well. And also noticing even the thoughts that occur on a subconscious level, which means that your consciousness becomes more in focus and stronger. That's an excellent exercise. I recommend that. You can do that even walking in the street. You're just walking in the street, watching everyone go around. You're just inhaling, breathing, and listening to the sounds. And don't try to think anything else, but just listen to the sounds around. And at some point you find yourself thinking something. Well, when you recognize that you are thinking something, where did the thought originate? And you go back like that. And that's a good exercise. And that exercise kind of connects very well with the exercises of self-inquiry that Ramana Maharishi was teaching, because that is asking you where did that thought originate? Find the origin of the thoughts, and even beyond that, where do the thoughts arise from? Where do they start from? And slowly you realize how subtle thoughts are and how they are like a little cloud that dissipates. And the origin is almost non-existent. But if you go back, you will find, well, there is an origin of consciousness, and there is a focus from which I am perceiving those thoughts. And the thoughts dissipate and disappear, but the presence of the self becomes stronger. So that's an interesting proposition. Right? Through meditation, we reduce the potency of the thoughts, and slowly we make these thoughts dissipate, coming back to their origin, and the impact of the thoughts and the karmas are going to be less empowered to affect me, and eventually it's like burning the seeds so that they don't create any more karma. That's it. I think that's enough for today. Waheguru, we were talking about Kriya Yoga in the previous video. Today we explored the 5 kleshas, the 5 colorings of thoughts, and how these 5 are very interestingly connected to universal emotions, and they are a continuation from my ignorance of the self and associating to the ego and my likes and my dislikes and clinging to those things and being fearful of losing them, and how I can deal with that through meditation. So that's today, and on the following week we will carry on with the karma. From now on, thank you very much. Have a lovely meditation. Thank you, everybody. If you are here, don't forget to like and share the video. Thank you, all the subscribers, and thank you for all the members. Until next time, Sadam.